Recording correctly. Welcome, everyone. I'm Lisa Austin. I am the gallery director at the Bruce Gallery at Edinburgh University, where we're celebrating a centennial for the art department. This is another one of our Art 100 events. This event is being recorded and will be available through our website, which is brucegallery.info. I want to say thank you to our sponsors, the university, the department, the Student Government Association, and Erie Arts and Culture. Tonight, you will be treated to another event organized by the Pittsburgh-based independent curator, Kololo Luckett. Titled Illuminating the Collection, this series has been created to investigate and celebrate some of the artworks stored in Edinburgh's Doucette Hall. Now, Edinburgh is about 2 hours from major arts institutions, Pittsburgh's Carnegie Museum, the Cleveland Museum of Art, and the Albright Knox in Buffalo. Now, these amazing institutions are not nearby. And back in the 1950s, we think, Edinburgh faculty initiated the permanent collection to benefit our students. Since then, about 500 prints, paintings, photographs, drawings, fiber works, ceramics, sculpture, and other objects have been assembled. The collection includes a silkscreen by Joseph Albers and another by Bridget Riley, etchings by Cezanne, Kathe Kowalski, and Picasso, and even a lithograph by Warhol. But until this pandemic closed the gallery to the public, no director was able to focus on this collection. Luckily, Dr. Charlotte H. Wellman, an Edinburgh art history professor who has long served on the Bruce Gallery Board, helped to form a plan. Wellman suggested that Kololo Luckett might be commissioned to help organize a series to illuminate the collection. This plan is now a reality, and I'm pleased to turn this special event and our special guests over to Kololo Luckett.
Right, thank you, Lisa. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us. My name is Kololo Luckett, and as Lisa said, I'm based here in Pittsburgh, and I'm an art historian and curator, and I've lived here, gosh, now over half my life. And it's been a real pleasure to get to know the community of Edinburgh, and I really look forward to actually going there. I haven't been there in a while, and so once we're on the other side of the pandemic, I really look forward to meeting some of you all in person, like I did with Charlotte this past weekend. But anyway, so tonight's format, let me just kind of go over that. We're gonna see a series of images by Kathe, and Dr. Wellman will start us off with some of the images, and then Professor Scrutton will then follow up with some of the images, and then we'll be in conversation with Laura Domentic. And this is kind of a structured yet informal conversation. So I encourage people to ask questions or put comments in the chat section, or you can just unmute yourself and just ask your question as well. So we're very flexible here. So I'm first going to just read a little bit about each panelist, and I will start with Laura. Laura Domentic is the executive director, the newly minted executive director of the Erie Art Museum. Before this recent appointment, she has worked as an independent arts consultant, leading successful fundraising efforts for a variety of institutional and individual clients. Previously, Domentic served for 11 years as director of the Pittsburgh Center for the Arts, the PCA, part of the Pittsburgh Filmmakers Pittsburgh Center for the Arts. At the PCA, she managed operations for the Arts Center campus in Mellon Park, developing, curating, and shepherding a full calendar of exhibitions and building community arts programming. Domentic is a visual artist, and her work will be in the upcoming exhibition, An Unpredictable Time and Place at Mass MoCA on July 2nd. So that's really exciting, Laura. Dr. Charlotte Wellman is professor of art history at Edinburgh University. And this wonderful publication, Full Exposure, The Uncompromising Life and Lens of Kathe Kowalski, will be taking many images from our presentation tonight that are featured in this beautiful publication authored by Dr. Wellman. And Fred Scrutton is assistant professor of art at Edinburgh University. Scrutton travels extensively throughout the United States to document self-taught artists and art environments. In addition to being widely exhibited, his documentary work on non-mainstream artists has been reproduced in many newspapers, magazines, and books. He has contributed numerous articles to Raw Vision and Folk Art Messenger magazines, and he maintains a website on the field of outsider art. Often befriending the artists, Scrutton makes frequent return visits with local artists and yearly road trips to document the evolution of more distant sites. So I just want to welcome our esteemed guests, and I am going to share my screen and we'll just jump right into it. All right, can everybody see my screen? Yes, all righty. So if everybody can unmute yourself. All right, we will get started.
So this is a self-portrait by Kathe. She's showing herself much the way a lot of photographers do, shooting into a reflective surface and holding her exquisite camera, a Rolleiflex camera that is predicated on looking down into it, holding it at belly level. The top pops up and the image is actually reversed when you look down into it. It produces crystalline prints, but of course it also permits a photographer like Kathe, as you can see in the self-portrait, to keep her eyes locked on her subject. So you can almost take a picture of someone without them being aware that you are depressing the shutter. And it makes it a very intimate instrument for portraiture, and she uses it to great effect. What I love about the self-portrait are there's so many things. This is after she has really left her family and her two young sons in the care of her first husband, Len, because the call of art is so profound that she answers it. And in so doing really shows how incredibly complicated women's lives are as they're pulled between their responsibilities as mothers and the need that they have to fulfill to become artists. I think it's so important that she's looking into a mirror that looks as if her fingers have repeatedly touched it. It's a surface we're very aware of. It isn't transparent. We don't look through it at her. We see her through it. And she was a person, every single shot she took was filtered through the prism of her own experience. So this is, for me, the absolutely essential self-portrait of her, because we look through her fingers at her, just as she looked at us through her own history. And those two experiences merge in her photographs. One could be really metaphoric about this too, that she shoots herself against the bright square of a window that has a kind of a covering over it. And so the window is kind of like a metaphor for the camera's lens, and that only makes it a richer image, and having all of those different layered meanings, that it's really about the nature of the photograph, but not just the nature of any photograph, the nature of Kathe's photographs. She was, just to kind of give you a sense of Kathe as a physical person, Kathe was very tall, and she had very beautiful hands, very large hands with long, slender fingers. You could see that in the way she handled the rollie. She had great big feet. She wore a big sized shoe. She was very body and very frank. She would stand and talk and stand very close to you to talk. And she had a very high girlish voice that was squawky. So when she laughed, she would do that. And anybody who knows her can almost hear her voice in their ear. She's very, very frank very frank person, but just as revealing as she was probing. So the wild child is the perfect image to start on. She really started by excavating her own family history, looking into family albums and looking for patterns, genealogical patterns, histories, ancestors, repeating narratives that would connect her to her past, but that she could also use as a springboard to communicate larger issues. And so much is going on here. You can see how tall she is here. And you can see people around her reacting to her with a combination of embarrassment and pleasure. She is just so out there. And the other pictures to the right and left of that image are pictures of her taken in a steamy bathroom. They're very frank pictures of her nude body. These are played in combination with taking showers with her first husband, Len, something that got her into terrific trouble in her MFA show at Eastern Michigan, where she was ordered to take them down because they were considered too frank and too explicitly sexual, which got her into the art journal and one of 2 censorship issues back in the day. And then, of course, a picture of her as a little girl in the lower left. And then, you know, the wild child really kind of makes that early, it was more than impishness. She was a rebellious child, born in spite of her mother's efforts to prevent her pregnancies and to get rid of pregnancy she didn't want. You know, Kathe was just a rebel from the first, and that's everywhere present in this image. These become kind of call and response documents, don't they? And she puts images next to each other so that they'll reverberate, but she also frames them with a narrative that's very subjective. Sometimes it's based on conversations or comments that others make to her, but always through her poetic filter, so that fact becomes fiction, and the difference between the two is very much obscured. But, you know, clearly she's playing with formal similarities between these two, but one is, you know, born of an angry rage, a smashed in window that she runs across on her travels, you know, whereas the other is, you know, a kind of an anchor and a kind of architectural grounding in the physical world. But it's framed with her very characteristic, very loopy script, where she confesses that when she was 18, my soon-to-be husband put his, and then underneath, fist through the window to keep me from leaving him. I stayed 20 years. She toiled to come up with these phrases. They look very spontaneous, but they're far from it. A lot of the people that Kathe photographs are surrogates. They're projections for her own history, but they're also ways for her to establish empathy and connection to the people that she photographed. Her sessions were extremely long and exhausting for her subjects and for herself, no less so for her tiny subjects here. She could visit a household for 3 to 4 hours, and just until she becomes a fly on the wall. And she'd sit with her back up against the wall and interact, but all the more often just become a silent witness to whatever the children, tired of being conscious of her and playing to the camera, became lost in their own play. And you know, at that moment, the photographs really started to work. So here, the daughter of a colleague, well, both of these are daughters of colleagues. She wasn't interested in their sons. She was interested in their daughters. She's wearing her angel wings and looking at Nickelodeon, whereas on the other side, the cropping presents a rather disturbing image of a child backlit, perhaps jumping up and down. She liked to adjust her camera so that she blurred her images, especially children, so that they're just lost in a vortex of motion. But here, in losing the entire top portion of the child's body and seeing her almost suspended above the deep window seat or ledge that she's standing on, presents an almost ominous image of the child's body. So these were kind of rather more intimate and personal series. And these play very effectively against her investigation of social issues, the elderly in nursing homes, prisoners at county and state prisons, and then what am I forgetting here? Oh, the rural poor, of course. The series of families that she shoots in her series on rural poverty, which is the last series she shoots before she stops photographing in 2004. So she did a series of her mother, Rose. This was her entry point into aging. This is shown in a single example of Rose, who had fantasies of being a dancer and used Kathe's camera as a means of playing out her fantasy on film. She liked to open her dress to her daughter's lens. She was completely unself-conscious about being nude. I think we're a little bit more uncomfortable, not with the female body, but with the aging female body. That is an embarrassment, even horror to the Western eye. But to Rose, it was liberation. Liberation on every level. So Kathe takes this image of her. She's recovering from bladder surgery here, actually, in this photograph on the left, but still opens her house dress so that and turns down a stocking so that Kathe's camera can greedily explore her mother's body. And then, of course, her loopy scrawl is interrupted by the image, but I'm not bothered by that because even though we can't read the script, it becomes a backdrop that is really in a lot of ways completed by the superimposition of the photograph. She promised Rose she would never put her in an institution. Kathe hated institutional settings. She felt it was wrong to place elderly people in retirement communities like the one on the right. So she went in there and she saw a lot of signs of imprisonment, like the shackles that they put on the elderly in case they do get out and wander off and they'll set off an alarm. She was shocked by that. And so I think she uses the space of the photographs on the right. Do people want to jump in here and talk about the ways in which these aging bodies reveal some of the circumstances, but also some of the ways in which the camera can frame the subject in a rather more complicated way? What do you all think? How does aging come off here?
I'm impressed with the image on the left. There is this kind of strength or confidence that she has, and I just think it's a very poetic image with the text too, and just thinking that she is posing and she's very. I don't know how lucid she was during the entire time, but it seems like from what you had written that there was this sense of. It was a way for her initially, and it was actually rather playful to a certain degree when they started that project. and not knowing the history behind the person on the right, just his facial expression and the angle of the shot, even having the walker kind of acting as bars in a sense, even just formally, as well as the ceiling area. There's a sense of being kind of despondent, I guess. So yeah, I think that's really interesting to hear you talk about how much care she gave to her mother, in really resisting that, and and she kind of allowed that kind of fierce independence, is what it seemed to me, for her mother in her later years.
Yeah, we're giving more attention to elderly women now. For those of you who follow the PBS series Masterpiece Theater, you may have seen the incredible performance by Glenda Jackson of in Elizabeth is Missing. Now, I think Rose had hallucinations. She saw things. And from my research on aging, I've read about a particular kind of dementia that's called dementia with Lewy bodies. And that's a form of dementia where you have hallucinations, where you see things that aren't there. And Rose, far from being horrified by this, or Kathe, far from being horrified by this, they simply turned that into part of the play, part of the story acting out that occurred. Just as a digression, Robin Williams was diagnosed with dementia with Lewy bodies and committed suicide soon after that. I'm not wanting to engage that. So this is like, we're looking at an alternative reaction to that, something that actually serves as a platform for storytelling between mother and daughter. And actually, Laura, the person on the right is a woman, but that raises a very interesting issue of how androgynous we become in our older age. So I actually, I like that about these, that we can't tell. And that's part of one of the phases that we enter into when we grow older.
Yeah.
Did you say Kathy's mother aspired to being a dancer in her youth, basically?
So that's why we see her,
Okay.
in her panties, doing her can,
Yeah.
like a fully bergère, right?
Right, because I would have read that if I didn't know any, if I just saw it anonymously, I think I would have read that as a old like cabaret dancer person in her youth. And even if she didn't actually do that, but if she was part of her sensibility, apparently.
The light in both of these images really struck me. I mean, the one with Rose, you kind of see this shadow in the background, and it's kind of from the chair and Rose sitting in the chair, but it's relatively a soft light, whereas the image on the right, there's a much more, it's a subtle, but you can kind of see more based on, of course, the angle. But I feel like in a way, Kathe is trying to call more attention to, the interior of this nursing home, as well as the actual people inside of it. So for us to kind of like do more of an inspection. So the lighting is a much more brighter light, also because possibly I think that there's kind of almost like a skylight in the ceiling to allow more light to come in too. So that's something that really struck me, was the ways in which she's usually using light to kind of frame certain aspects within the photograph.
Yeah. Fred, don't you think that's the result of the shift from a more personal collaboration to a documentary mode? That she needs to shoot the residents differently because she's, doing her faculty grant and her sabbatical and going into these nursing homes, and she has to fulfill a kind of more documentary focus.
Well, as far as I know, she was essentially always an available light photographer. So I with Rose, I'm not sure, she might have positioned her, like she might have seen that one could be more of a setup shot. And then inside the nursing home, I think it's pretty much, it is what it is. It's just like this all enveloping overhead light. But I'm not sure how much I don't know actually how much she might have repositioned, took advantage of available light opportunities that she found when she was doing the more personal work.
Or moving that walker.
Mhm,
I wonder, because that, walkers are always near at hand. So when the person is ready to step up, it's right there. And
Mhm.
it's too far away from the woman that we're looking at on the right. Maybe it's not her walker. But if not, whose? So, I wonder if she wanted us, and it's interesting how the kinds of things that she focuses on, like in her self-portrait, she's focusing on the rolly. And here she's focusing, I don't know. Yeah, no, it's kind of a little out of focus, but the walker.
Mhm.
Mm.
For me, I read it as more of she's very deliberate in how she's positioning that walker. Yeah. Yeah. All right, shall we go to the next one?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was the reigning favorite, wasn't it, Kololo?
Yes.
We loved this, and we read it very differently.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Knowing what you wrote about it, but I still, yeah, I find it very, very fascinating. I
Well,
really
especially-
like this image.
especially given her resistance to the sense of reading a lot of these spaces as spaces of imprisonment. And this is her kind of escaping the frame and hence perhaps escaping the confinement that she finds herself in, which is, I think, very much the way you read it. This is that movemented camera, though. As this woman rolls, she allows that movement to blur rather than worrying about adjusting her camera settings in order to capture her more crisply. And, we're groove into that incredibly focused wheel in the negative or the contact print on the left background.
Yeah, there's a lot of wheels,
Mm-hmm.
that are picked up in the image on your left. And then even on the right, you don't see the wheels from the main, the person in the foreground, but in the background, you see this person's back and they're seated in a wheelchair and you see their partial wheel. So, and I was saying the other day that this image for me kind of demonstrates or shows at least or elicits kind of like this older person's kind of, they're on the go, but it's kind of looking back at their kind of formative years, their youthful years of really being able to be fully independent. So, yeah.
She's not being pushed in this chair either, as
No.
we so often see. She is able to spin her own wheels.
Yes.
Literally, right? Yes. And and I love that her mouth is open. It makes the print to have that kind of dark shape in her body. Yeah.
The bar is in the upper right corner on the one on the right, so she's not going to be able to escape.
No, this is true. I like the way she incorporates the reference to the negative as part of the print. I know that's a whole vogue. Fred, what's your experience of photographers who really show the print, really kind of call attention to the sense that these are taken one after the other, and there's a kind of a cinematic feel to including both?
Yeah, normally in this case, I think trying to think here, I think that the images, they're not actually, I assume they are actually consecutive frames.
Mhm.
Is there a number on there that would confirm
There's
that?
3, but not another one to tell us whether they're consecutive.
Right, but normally I think she got into a slight dilemma here because of the square roll film camera, because on a 35 millimeter, you'd have the consecutive frames and they would be side by side horizontally, and here they would be side by side vertically, or the pictures have to be turned on their side. So I think she had to splice the two together. I don't know if what I'm saying makes sense, but
No, we'll see it in the prison pictures.
okay.
That's the way they actually came out.
So that's what she's trying to do here. It doesn't, just the nature of this particular format means that it has to be fudged in a sense a little bit, because it is side by side, but it doesn't actually show itself as a continuous strip of film. But that's just a function of the medium format roll film.
Now, I know Avedon exposed that border. And
Yeah.
also she's not cropping.
Well, right, that, there's another component. People who weren't trying to show consecutive frames, there was a tradition, I think it more or less started with Avedon, as far as I can remember, but of showing the black borders, enlarging the negative carrier, and showing the black borders of the film. And Cartier-Bresson, no, sorry, I take that back. Cartier-Bresson did that, and so that would be way before Avedon. And for Avedon, I think it was to show that it's a piece of film. It was sort of like bringing the process forward. And with Bresson, I think it was more to show definitively that it was uncropped, because that was like a religious tenet for photography for him, that the image could never be cropped. So that showed definitively that it wasn't. With Avedon, I think it was the white borders, and then the black of the edges of the film provided a kind of frame for the white borders. So it was both a framing graphic device as well as acknowledging the materials, that we are looking at a piece of film here, which are normally cropped away for more of an illusion.
They look very spontaneous, but she really held to that sense that you showed what you shot, and you go into the dark room and fudge it and in order to achieve a good print. You printed what you shot. So, these look very informal, and actually they're very carefully shot and carefully chosen. I love this one. I love this one. I love it for so many reasons. I like what she does with nature, and I guess that's in the sense that she's dealing with an incredibly artificial environment that confines elderly people. So a lot of the shots, all of the things that reference nature are artificial. So really kind of like fake flowers, very, very prescriptive bouquets that have been given by family members or guests, printed textiles like the dresses or housecoats or coverlets that they might have on a bed to personalize it. But here she is wheeled herself outside, and she is parked herself in front of a hedge. So we kind of get a play between one kind of nature and another kind of nature. And then of course there's human nature, but I just find this an incredibly interesting photograph of an old woman. And I'm wondering again, if anybody just kind of wants to groove to this one for a few moments before we pass along. Look at the collar. Oh my God. So great. I love that line. I love that line.
I love that there are these kind of abstract shapes that this woman, the composition of this photograph. So you have these series of like triangles, and even her hands coming out like this triangle. And it's this big focus on her hands. And it's as if she's this kind of she has this commanding presence. So for me, it appears as if I'm getting a peek into kind of like who she is as a person, that she's not to be messed with.
No, and the hands are gorgeous.
The texture of the skin is just wonderful, and the shape, the shape of her fingers, and
Right.
yeah, it is a very powerful image. I think this is probably one of my favorites, and the expression on her face, and it's interesting because she is it is such a monumental image, but then the idea of even just within the square, she does feel a bit confined too. Like this is the space that she can take up, her elbows kind of being cropped in tight. I love this image.
And Kathy's down here too, and close to her, and shooting up. Even with the Rolleiflex, she has to be on her knees, I would think. Yeah.
Sydney Greenstreet in the Maltese Falcon.
Even her necklace, because I first thought is this a rosary? We can't see the cross, or is this an actual adornment as far as jewelry, or is this like a religious kind of,
Mhm.
you know, embellishment that's around. I mean, I know my mom sometimes used to wear her rosary
Mm.
around her neck, but she used to tuck it inside of her, almost like a scapula, you know, tuck it inside of her top. But for me, I was just like, oh, her hands are kind of over, you know,
She's
that,
got it in there.
right? Yeah. So,
Yeah, I had not even thought of that. She does um, use adornment in very empowering ways with her older subjects.
mhm, mhm,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, Fred, you're up.
Okay. Well, this happens to be one of my personal favorites
Mhm.
of Kathy's pictures, and it's also kind of a jumping off point for talking about her as a teacher maybe a little bit, and her attitude about what her photography students could and could not do. And one thing they could not do was anything related to the field of commercial photography. So this is going back to the lighting. I'd say graphically this is very strong, and where it departs, shall we say, from like commercial wedding photography, is it's not exactly glamorous, flattering kind of light. It's still that overhead, eyes coming down in a shadow, coming down, putting the eyes in the shadow kind of lighting. So it's not idealized, and that I think is, I think that's Kathy's thing. I mean, she was a, reality, very much a reality-based person, and even the no cropping thing is probably an extension of that. That not taking anything away. This is everything that was in front of the camera. So she would absolutely not allow students to do commercial photography, and she was very hardcore that they were going to go to graduate school in the fine arts, and I'm not sure what was going to happen to them next unless they were LaToya. But so yeah, so I guess that's what I have to say about that one.
Mm.
And I'm sure Fred, with these really interesting, I was saying the other day about how this is almost like the B-roll of, you know, the wedding
Mhm.
images. And so I was curious to see where the actual picture was of this bride, you know, when she's, you know, fully made up.
Mm.
She's actually posing for the
Mhm.
camera. So, but I think this is just very clever to kind of show these other components to, you know, the preparation
Mhm.
of a wedding.
All the scaffolding that's underneath all of that.
That's right. Like a lint roller.
Interior.
One hand.
Oh, yeah,
and
the padded bra and the
Water.
really, really tight slip that she's got on. And it looks like a really cold bottle of water and a spray tan. Spray tan? I think maybe. Yeah, no, it's fabulous that way.
Okay, well, I personally like her, what I guess we would call social, or most interested, I should say, in her, what we call social documentary work. So this would be the rural poverty series. And I personally like it because it's not overtly political. So it's, in a way, it's precursor to where things have moved in recent years. And so I find that a lot of work along this social documentary, the concerned photographer in that area, tells me a little bit too much what to think, or I feel like the world is being packaged in a way more than I really want it to be. So what I like about, or then I think is really, what am I saying? It's a kind of a manipulation, I guess. And so what I like about Kathy's work along these lines is it seems more, it's sympathetic to the subjects, and it's taking sort of traditional social documentary kinds of subjects, but I feel like it's a little more neutral, like it's not hitting me over the head. It's not trying to make some particular point about, I don't know, it's not, what am I trying to say? It's not designed with a specific ideological end in mind, if that makes sense, what I'm trying to say. So it's more accepting things, showing things the way they are and letting us feel empathetic towards the subjects, but not necessarily telling us what's supposed to happen next, or not, doesn't have an agenda in the background. So I personally, and that's kind of out of sync with the times, and maybe this is a partially reflection of this work is a couple decades old now, I guess. But I personally find that kind of refreshing, that it's just her interacting with the people as people and not necessarily bringing some kind of agenda to the work. So I don't know if that makes sense, but that's.
I think it does. I think there's a lot more nuance going on then. And I mean, this is one of my other favorite
Mine too. Yeah.
And I mean, certainly it has those kind of, I can't help but think of like Migrant Mother and those sorts of images, but it's certainly of a particular time. You can see by the clothing and that sort of thing, but it's also, there is a timelessness to it too. And I'm so drawn in by the dirty toes. Yeah, I love it.
I definitely feel that, Laura, and even like the embroidery on her jeans to the necklace, and it looks like it's a heart shape jewel on her necklace. And then even like the deterioration of the house, like the paint that is peeling. But then, this is a wooden structure, and you see with the porch, there's some really, the details, there's some ornate detailing on the banisters you see with these columns that somebody puts a lot of care into making this house. But then you see on the floor of the porch there that it is definitely seen better times. And then even just the facial expressions of the child in the foreground, and then this older figure with this younger figure sitting on the steps there. They all have this very pretty rawness to them. It looks like there's a lot of heaviness of weight, contemplation for them. That once again, as Fred said, it really, pulls you in, and it's a very compassionate, you feel this, I feel very, this compassion towards these people in this frame. So. And Fred, this is your image. You own this.
Yes, I have a print of this in my office down the hall. Yeah, and again, I think the little girl's facial expression is kind of beautiful and kind of creepy at the same time. And I just, again, to me, it's sort of richly ambiguous, because it's a very barren interior. And then the only thing that's there is just about is the bowl of jelly beans. And so then you say, is this because this is the day after Easter and they were left over, and this is, they're just there? Or is this what this little girl eats on a regular basis? But I like the fact that it's ambiguous like that. And I can feel, I don't know, I just feel like I can sort of connect with her. And once again, I don't feel like I know exactly what I'm supposed to think about it. And I like that. It gives me room to maneuver, and just let it be ambiguous. Let it be a little mysterious. And we were just talking before about, there's another picture which might answer the day after Easter question of this, what appears to be this same little girl, and then what could be a twin sister, a very similar looking sister, and they seem to be eating Cheez-Its or some other kind of junk food. So maybe the context starts to supply more of the story, and when you see the group. Yeah.
And I was looking at this image, it says it was taken in 2003.
Oh.
And the previous one as well. And she assigned them these numbers. It's rural poverty 13E. So I don't know if that corresponds to the actual, negative, the number, or I was curious about that too. All right.
Okay, and then the close-up of the lady with the flower pattern dress there, this reminds me of that one a little bit, where a lot of the emotion comes from the clutching from the hand gesture. Like I felt like in that previous lady, she was like, it seemed like part of her skin was peeling in a way, in an odd looking way, like she was clutching so hard, and then that fit with her facial expression and what we could see of maybe this lady's expression. So again, to me, it's just, I like it in that it seems like kind of unvarnished reality. And I think that's what Kathe was trying to do largely, was just get a sense and a sense of empathy or connection to this person. That in this case, I think is, I guess it's pretty apparent, it's coming mostly through the hand gesture there.
I think she was in an environment that was stultifyingly standardized and homogenized and brutally antiseptic and institutional. And the women were all dressed in interchangeable, prison clothes. And the only way that they had to really separate themselves and call attention to their individual tastes was through things like, this woman is taking incredibly good care of her hands.
Yeah.
And she's beautifully manicured. And, as you look at other photographs of the women, that all sorts of details like that caught Kathe, and she captured those.
And this one is titled The Other Side of the Fence, D3.
This is what you were talking about, right, Fred? With stacked.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this would. Yes, this could actually be consecutive, like two frames printed together, because yeah, that's the way it would go through the camera. Yeah, I think that one would be, when it's a vertical, she could do it that way. Yeah, and with the hands again and the expression, and I think it has a very nice graphic aspect in this case as well. And that lighting we're talking about, and the sort of dark eyes, with the overhead institutional lighting fits into that. And it does illuminate the hands though, as opposed to the face, because of the direction of the light. And I even like, the tilt of the sign in the back, that's at a little bit of a diagonal, that kind of mirrors the tilt of her head.
This really shows the humanity of this person for me. And then even the watch, it makes me think about, like, okay, how much time has this person served? How much time has she served? How much time does she have left to serve? And then this one and the previous one were taken in 1996. And then I think about the hairstyle too.
Yeah,
Sides of the hair, and yeah.
it is really dated, isn't it? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and again, I think once again, the graphics are very strong, and I get the expression and the hands, and obviously the shackles, and It's the same. I think I can maybe explain slightly better what I was trying to say before about the agenda. Like, it seems like when people do this kind of work now, there'd be this whole other thing going on the side about prison reform or something like that. There'd be some kind of would be to serve some kind of outside agenda. And Kathe may well have been interested in that, but I feel like with the individual photographs that it really is just one person at a time, one story at a time, human to human interaction that we can have as viewers with the person.
I wonder how the staging of this image, what that was like, because clearly you can see from the floor that this is, part of a partial, like, half court basketball markings, and then you can't see, but most likely in the background up top, that's the lower part of the net that is out of the frame. But here this woman is chained, her feet are chained, but yet she's in some type of auditorium where one can get exercise, right? And it's for you're very active. This is a space where you're supposed to be very active, yet she's very much confined and limited. And even like her kind of draped over the arm of the chair and looking away from the lens.
Yeah, it feels pretty spontaneous. So if it's somewhat posed, I don't know. Not really sure how much Kathe may have directed her subjects, if at all. But if it is partially, it seems very believable. Seems very spontaneous. Doesn't look at all like quote unquote posed to me.
Right. And I was meaning more about why she chose to photograph this person inside this basketball, athletic exercise space and bring the chair in there, as opposed to putting her somewhere else.
Well, I think that's an interesting question, because is it that they just have chairs in there, like doesn't really get used, for basketball court anymore? Or did Kathe do that for metaphorical purposes? Because you're going to play basketball, you have to, run free and up and down the court, which she couldn't do. And because it is a little incongruous to have a chair like that if it's a functioning athletic floor. So, but then it might be that they just have chairs, they don't really use it for that anymore or whatever, and there's just chairs like that, just a lounge sort of area. So who knows? But the metaphor still works.
I have a feeling that these were places designated by the prison staff for Kathe to meet with her subjects.
So she probably
They probably
it's reasonable to think she brought the chair.
Because they knew what Kathe wanted to do, and
yeah,
she needed that. I like the way that her subject here makes the expressive most of the limitations that are placed on her body. It's a very jaunty expression. Pose that she's got. Very, very elegant. I like her decision to turn away from Kathe and to articulate her own separate space. And the way she's turned up the cuffs of her pants, just to lend some individuality to this awful uniform she's compelled to wear, right? And the white socks, such a wonderful contrast to her body and to her shoes. Yeah.
Okay, same thing. No, well, not the same thing, but I think the hands are very expressive, and the fact that she's almost hidden, hidden behind her hair there, and it's also a kind of self-protective gesture. And again, I think the graphics, I think the relatively plain light background works very nicely, and you've got the stripe on the sleeve there, and the hair flinging up in the corner. So I think it comes together very nicely, both graphically and emotionally.
There is a sense of she's almost like as if she's embracing herself, and I'm unsure if she's grabbing her, you know, she's reaching around her legs, or is that the back of a chair?
Mm.
It's kind of hard to decipher, but the mere fact that I love this kind of tenderness that is being shown here, with this embrace of herself.
And she's not looking at Kathe again.
Mhm.
You know, this is her own composition in a way. She's placing her body in space in the ways that she wants to on her own terms. Kathe wasn't allowed to identify any of these subjects because they were incarcerated. So, you know, it's really interesting to understand that she had to give them distinctive qualities in different ways, besides naming them, besides giving them their names.
And then we have this final two images.
So Shelley, since Shelley happens to be here, somebody told me that, and I can't remember who, and I asked Suzanne, and it wasn't Suzanne, that Kathe more or less talked or strongly encouraged LaToya to change to be a photo major. And I thought the person said from being a graphic design major, not to mention to do social documentary work of her own family. Does that story sounds familiar? Or somebody, I don't think I'm completely dreaming it up. Right? I heard it somewhere.
So Fred, what these two images show are Kathe and LaToya Ruby Fraser.
Yeah.
And Kathe was LaToya's mentor, right, at
Mhm.
Edinburgh.
Yeah. So Shelley,
Mhm.
do you know? Yeah, do
Well,
you know if you heard that story? Is that?
I know I lived that story. Fred.
Okay. Maybe I heard it from you then. And I got it wrong probably, right?
LaToya and Bridget were extremely close. They were best friends at the time. Bridget Davitt, who is now our colleague. And they were both in graphic design in the early classes. But LaToya from the start was anti rules, anti everything.
Mhm.
And she really, you know, she didn't take to it. I think what she was thinking about doing with design was to move to Chicago and publish a zine, which was a plan that they had from really early on sophomore year. But she took up with Kathe really early, and that's where she was.
Oh.
If
Okay.
that answers your question.
So it was more she wanted to do it, not so much that Kathe strongly encouraged her to make the change, or when.
Well, I wouldn't put that past Kathe at all.
I still think I heard that part of the story from someone.
Yeah,
Any-
I have a question for you, Fred.
Uh-oh.
Why do you think that Kathe was so vehemently against any kind of commercial applications of her art?
Of
Or even with her students, like not wanting her students to think about anything with lighting or commercial aspects or anything?
I think she was just a hardcore purist, and I think it partially goes back to the connection to reality thing, and that commercial photography is, you know, sort of scrubbed over, and you know, everything, you know, the production values make things look good or look better than unvarnished reality, so to speak. So I think it was just a strong belief on her part that that's only thing that was worth pursuing, and that commercial photography just is too superficial, or at least it didn't belong in an art department, we could put it that way. So I don't know if that answers the question, but
And I just wanted to interject. Hi, Shelley. You designed the publication, right?
I did.
It's a beautiful publication.
Thank you. Thank you. I saw it as my gift to Kathe and for her sons. Her sons were really involved in it as well. So thank you.
okay. I'm afraid I have to leave this august company here because I have a class that I said would be starting at 6:30, so I've got some students
Oh
waiting.
boy,
for me
okay, Fred.
downstairs.
All right, well, I have some questions for Charlotte and Laura. Thank
So
you, Fred.
bye, everyone.
Thank you, Fred.
Thank you,
So,
Fred.
so Kathe Kowalski's archive is at the Erie Art Museum. And, you know, while we're, you know, in this pandemic, I know that for me as an art historian and, you know, research is very much, you know, central to my work as an art historian and as a curator. And there are limited archives out there that are digitized because it's a massive undertaking. And I wanted to ask you, Laura, about, are there any plans for, you know, the digitization of Kathe's archive? What do you all have in store for Kathe's
Mhm.
archive?
Yeah. Well, I'm still learning. I've only been there a couple of months now, and I'm certainly still getting my way around the archive and the collections that we have, because it is quite vast. I do see that as this, you know, enormous potential for being able to use them as educational resources and just these kind of just visual culture with some of the collection beyond certainly Kathe's work, but to be able to speak to you know, the larger history and how these objects have kind of related to the time that they're in and whatever other social context that they're in as well. I agree. I think, you know, there's been some wonderful things that, you know, like the Louvre and other major museums that have put their collections online, which is fantastic. Being a smaller regional museum, that's a much more daunting task because of the resources and the financial time and staff time to put towards that. But I think a longer term goal is to do that because there is so much value in these stories, and all of these objects have such really beautiful, rich stories. And what I loved about in this particular talk too was the connection of the teacher and the mentor, you know, with LaToya and Kathe, and how what a beautiful like bond and respect between them. And I think to be able to see that lineage in a way is really important, because I think sometimes when you hear about artists being influenced by other artists, you think, oh, well, they were just looking at other people's work and maybe not really knowing them. But a lot of it has really so much to do with the personal interaction and the time that they've spent, and the you know, whether it's the comments that they've received back or the conversations that they've had. So I really like this kind of more interpersonal kind of conversation that starts to happen, because it is very personal.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. I also wanted to talk a little bit about Kathe, the person, and kind of like her kind of upbringing, uh, kind of like her biography. Um, you know, Charlotte, can you speak a little bit about that? and how, because she does a lot of these social, interrogations of society, and if you think about the geography of her photographs, there are kind of like these spaces that don't really get a lot of love and attention typically. You think about these rural spaces, we tend to look at the urban environment, the city, as this place that, people tend to gravitate towards and think about. And when she's documenting this, the rural poverty, she's really giving us, showing us through this compassionate lens of, people that live in these spaces, that they deserve care as well. And it makes me think of like Dorothea Lange and some of the other photographers, Edward Weston. I mean, there's a whole bunch of them from, you think about during the Great Depression, the early part of the 19th century, or I'm sorry, 1900s, 20th century.
Mhm.
And I mean, I think about myself. I mean, I came from a rural area and, a very working class area in Mississippi. So, that those three people sitting out on that porch really resonates with me.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
and one would think, oh, did Kathe come from this kind of working class family? Or why did she choose to gravitate towards these kind of, groups of people that are in these, confined spaces like the prison or, rural spaces.
Yeah. No, I don't see that much in her background, and Shelley knows her very well, knew her very well too. But her family, they originally immigrated from Lithuania, and they were Jews who settled in New Jersey. If I had to put them in a class, I would say working to middle class, wouldn't you, Shell? I mean, her Uncle Nathan was a merchant. He's the one, but she taps her family for various forms of dysfunction, in those early genealogical family albums, in the sense that she looks and finds patterns of abuse. She finds mental illness within her family. She chronicles a high number of suicides, almost counting them up, and arriving at a total. And that plays against the perfectly ordinary jealousies and behaviors in adolescence. They're all kind of a melee in her work. But it's also a way for her to find not only correspondences between older generations and ancestors and family members and herself and her own history, but then to take those connections and turn and try to find them with other people who are different from her. Her study of the rural poor, I don't see any real connections between that and her past. The prison population, certainly, I think she's looking back to her own experiences of being abused, both mentally and physically, by her partners, and finding resonance there and connection with the women that she met. And of course, the nursing home certainly comes out of a position that she'd already well established about institutionalizing the elderly, that she brought. That was the baggage that she brought to that series. And then I think she kind of found the images that matched and fulfilled that viewpoint in a lot of ways.
Thank you. Well, in the interest of time, I think we should wrap up. And does anybody want to share any parting words, and also Laura, is there anything that you want to share as far as upcoming with the Erie Museum? We're really happy that you're there.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here. I think we're just going through, like everyone else, going through a major time of transition, and we have some pretty exciting shows that will be coming up, just kind of gradually opening up again. And I really see it over the next year and beyond to really kind of mine the collection that we have and explore the educational programs that we can offer to people, whether it's hopefully more so in person as well as online.
All right, great. Okay, well, thank you to those who were able to join us. And I know this is recorded, so this will live online. And I think that this is a really wonderful start to really build scholarship around, Kathy's work, and put her in conversation with other photographers. So thank you all for joining us, and have a good evening.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you.